Hi, my name's Debbrah, and I'm an alcoholic. Woo! Yikes. Off to a great start. Okay. Um, wow, I'm so excited to be here. This is really awesome. Thank you very much for inviting me to share here. It's an honor and a privilege to share at AA meetings, and thank you, Barbara and Faith, for thinking of me. And I feel doubly, excited because Dr. Paul's speaking, who I just love and adore what you've done for me anyway, in my program. Whew, get centered here for a second. Lots of folks here. Well, I'm hopefully going to be sober 10 years this coming Halloween. God willing, one day at a time. And my father was the one that carried the message of Alcoholics Anonymous to me, which I know is kind of unusual for family members. But my parents used to own retirement homes in Santa Monica. And my dad used to come out from back east all the time, and he had some problems, He went through St. John several times, and he got 12-stepped by the milkman at my mom's retirement home. Thank God for that, because, when he first got sober, he talked a lot about Alcoholics Anonymous, and he sort of like went around suggesting that my brother and my mother and I were all alcoholics, and he was right, actually, but we didn't really like hearing about it at first, but I'd like to say that I, jumped right in and took his word, and, but I went to like 4 meetings. This was like 4 years before I actually got sober, and I saw all these people up in the Palisades, and they are all like really old, and they'd had cars taken away and lost wives and jobs and all this stuff, and they were talking about turning their life over to this higher power thing, and I just thought, well, I'm glad it's helping them, but I just kind of felt like, well, it's kind of a cop-out to turn your life over to, if they really need it, good for them. I mean, it must help them. But it just didn't ring any bells for me, so I proceeded to go back out there and drink. And I tried things like, hypnotists and stuff like that. And I was on a spiritual quest, and I was doing things, I'm not going to say what, because I may offend someone if I were to say what they were, but they were kind of offbeat, let's put it that way. And yet I was searching. Meanwhile, I was still drinking and using drugs and all of that. And I'm looking because there's a girl in the audience that used to hang out with her mother. And she was a little girl at the time. And I remember going to a party that her parents had and getting so drunk we went down to Mooney's on Main Street. It turned into Mervin's or something like that, and Marvin's or Mervin's. Anyway, and we all got so drunk, and I remember I was dancing, and I slung my arms, and I knocked a whole bunch of glasses down, and we were walking down the street, and I was falling into the gutter and just laughing and all this. And I had just had my daughter at that time. My daughter was about 6 months old. And, what happened for me was that I just got into this pattern of drinking to chill out, because my parents did that. My dad and my mother used cocktails to, relax at night. My dad would come home from work, and they'd sit and they'd have their cocktails. And my parents, were always very social, and they moved a lot. And when I was growing up, we moved probably every 18 months. And my parents used to joke, because my brother and I would offer the milkman or the mailman a cocktail. Anybody that would come to the door, we'd say, "Would you like a cocktail?" And because my parents were always socializing and having parties, and we get to have our little Shirley Temple or whatever. And I began a life of fantasy thinking and trying to be an adult, and I didn't fit in with people my own age, and so I kind of like watched the movies a lot and wanted to be sophisticated and all this, and we moved so much that I never really learned how to be intimate, to really have a close friend or anything like that. So we skip ahead, and years later, I spent a lifetime of being a people pleaser. I didn't really know that was a form of dishonesty, and I, was like an overachiever in school, and I was shamed a lot. At one point, when I was in second grade, I lived out here in California, and I went to this school, and they just loved me. They thought I was adorable with my long blonde hair, but no one taught me anything, and so then we moved to Chicago, and I didn't know anything. I didn't know how to read, and I got put back a grade, and this started me in this need to overachieve and get straight A's and this kind of thing. So I think because of that need to people please and be the good little girl, it kept me from starting my drinking until much later in life. When my daughter was about 6 months old, I decided that I needed a drink, and I'd had some drinking experiences younger, in college and high school. But again, because of that people-pleasing thing, and also the desire to be skinny, because Twiggy was big, and everybody wanted to be skinny as a twig, and so cocktailing and drinking had too many calories, and my vanity outweighed my desire to party. And also, I was a chicken. I just was, afraid that I'd get into that bad reefer madness, that they used to talk about. At any rate, so I forgot to mention that prior to getting married to my second husband, which is where he's the father of my daughter, I had one little quickie marriage before that, and that guy and I used to run around and steal newspaper racks in Torrance, and he would steal porno racks, and we'd spray paint them, and then we'd sell them to the Daily Breeze. And this was like this crazy life I led. And at one point, I moved to Las Vegas. I did a lot of weird things, and it wasn't till I got to Alcoholics Anonymous that I started to, look at some of this stuff and see that maybe it was just a little insane. So I'm sort of skipping all over the place, but my real drinking began when my daughter was about 6 months old. And I wanted to be cool, see, and I never was. I was always a wannabe. And I tell people that I'm a recovering shallow person because I was very shallow when I came to AA. I wanted to be the female Barbie doll, okay? I looked like Barbie, and, I kind of pranced around, and it was more about that, and it was like what you were doing and where you were going and where you had been and what you were driving and where you lived. That's what was important to me. And when my dad got sober before I did, it took me 4 years to realize that I really did have a problem with the drinking. And I got to that pitiful, incomprehensible demoralization. I didn't go to some of the lengths that others have, and I think that's because my girlfriend, her dad was in a recovery situation. My father started in a recovery situation. And I started to, the walls started to close in on me, and I began to get little glimmers of, like, that there was a program for people, and that AA wasn't just people with green teeth sitting in dark rooms, with trench coats on, because I just thought that's what alcoholics were. I had no idea that, normal people, regular-looking people could be alcoholics, and except when I went to that Palisades meeting with my dad, they all looked very nice, but they were all old, and so I continued to drink a lot, and I became I did all the things that they talk about in the big book. I hid my bottles, and I drank, I led a double life. I would be Mary Mount Mother by day, and then I'd put on the stiletto heels and get in my orange Corvette, take my Doberman Pinscher with me, and drive to Hollywood and dance. And I was married, And my husband at the time, he was really untreated Al-Anon. I mean, he just, the next day he'd say, well, did you have a good time? He never questioned it. And I felt like I almost wanted to run down the street naked, to get his attention. And it just never happened. And eventually, I came to my own realization that I was a real alcoholic because my life got perpetually worse. And what happened for me was my feelings about myself. I got to that real place of self-loathing. I hated who I was. I had all these standards for myself. When we take a moral inventory, the morals that I had were ways that I felt. It was the truth that I had set up for myself. I would never go on stage drunk. Well, prior to my getting sober, I had black and blues all over my body. And I was doing this play, Bleacher Bums, where I'd have to walk out in a bikini. I had to literally put body makeup all over me because I was drunk all the time, and I had black and blues, and I was, I remember at one point I was driving to an acting class that I had, and I had like this moment where I felt like maybe I should just drive into the wall, and things like that kept happening. And then one time I, was going to a play that I was in. We had a performance, and I was crocked, and I almost missed the show. It was like 2 o'clock on a Sunday, and I was like crocked, and I, totally almost missed the show. And I actually had an accident in the car before I got to the theater, and someone, gave me flowers as I was walking up close to the theater, and I told everyone that I had just spilt the water on myself, and really it had been me. I'd had an accident, and that kind of thing, continued to happen to me. And about a month before I got, well, 6 months before I got sober, I had like shakes. I had the shakes, and I had diarrhea on a daily basis, and because I still had it in my brain, that if you drank too many drinks, you'd gain weight. So I just solved that by not eating, so I just didn't eat. So I had become like this anorexic woman with black and blues all over my body, and I was calling people all the time and talking ad nauseum and boring them with the same dreck over and over and over again. And then I'd call them the next day, and they'd say, "We talked to you last night, okay? You told us already." "Oh, I did?" And I mean, I just did that over and over again. And some of my friends finally said, "Don't call. Just don't call," because I had worn them out. Meanwhile, my mother, I lived in this fabulous house in Santa Monica, and I had a housekeeper, and I had a husband and a boyfriend, and and 3 children, and a pool, and 2 cars, and the whole thing. And I had everything everybody wants, except that I was dying on the inside, and I was hating myself more and more. And I kept putting myself in positions to be hurt, and I kept doing things for people. I was a classic, I'm going to do things for you, and then you're going to treat me the way I deserve to be treated, And of course, what happened was I did all the stuff that it talks about in chapter 5, where, we arrange the scenery, and we put the, set the props and the lights, and do the whole thing, and we put the players in place, and then they don't do what we want them to do. And so we try to manage just a little more, because we have their best interest in heart. Well, I did all of that. I mean, when I read that in the big book, I just was nailed. It just nailed me right to the cross, because I had done that my whole life. I kept thinking if I just did the right things for people, said the right things, looked the right way, drove the right car, wore the right clothes, and yet I had this thing about don't get too close to me. I don't want you too close to me, and all of that has evaporated since I've been in AA, I'm going to get sober here because I eventually called my dad's sponsor. My dad moved to Oceanside. He got sober. My father never made amends to me, and when he was in St. John's, I went to see him before he got sober. Well, he was in the process of getting sober, and I said to him, Daddy, I'm going to go to Hawaii and start a family. And he said, don't ever have children. It's the biggest mistake I ever made. And I said, see you later, Roy. And I split. And I continued to drink until I got sober. And then, 4 years later, I got sober. Well, what I did was I called him up and I said, Daddy, those meetings that you go to, well, how can I get one of those big books? And how can I get one of those directory things, Actually, I still had his big book. He'd given it to me 4 years before. I never read it. I had the 12 and 12. Never seen it, never read it. So he gave me his sponsor's name, and the next day his sponsor showed up at my house and took me to my first meeting at 18th in Arizona. And I walked in, I sat down, and I cried for an hour and a half because I couldn't believe that I had sunk so low. I looked at these people and I thought, oh my God, these people look just hideous, and I am one of them. I'm just as bad as they are. Today, that's my home group. And they love me unconditionally. See, in Alcoholics Anonymous, I've gotten everything I ever wanted. I always wanted to be loved unconditionally. I always wanted to be able to talk and have somebody hear me without commenting, criticizing, controlling me. You know, I mean, I love our traditions for that purpose, and the you know, the concepts and all of that, because I can be the minority in a meeting and have my voice respected, you know, and that's something that was never possible in my home. It just wasn't something that my parents were familiar with. And you know, I have no axe to grind about my dad. My dad and I, you know, I'm sober 9.5 years, and my dad died 4 years ago. He died sober down in Oceanside. And, you know, my last memory with my daddy was standing around his bed with my brother and my children saying the Lord's Prayer. And we got to talk about two things during the last 5 years of his life: fishing and sobriety. They were safe topics, you know. And I got to make my amends to him, and I got to tell him the 10 most favorite memories that I had of him. And I did that before he died. I also had a brother. I say had because he's passed away too. And throughout my whole life, my brother didn't get along with me very much. He died of alcoholism and AIDS 3 years ago. And, you know, I used to whine and pule at my parents because they always gave me everything. And my brother was, he was more of a screw-up than I was. I had like the double life. I kept a really good look for everybody out there. You know, it was my friends that had to hear the worst of it. But my parents, all these people enabled me, they didn't know. And my brother, you know, always got the short end of the stick, and my mother made no secret about the fact that I was it. I was the child, her blood child. My brother was adopted. And, you know, she made me number one, and no wonder my father hated me, because when I came along, he became number two. See, now that I understand the disease of alcoholism, I understand why my dad resented me, even though he still loved me, because I bumped him from number one. And my brother was somewhere way in the distant past. And at any rate, I whined and puled how they never did anything for him. And then I realized, wait a minute, you've never done anything for him. I'd had birthday parties for all these people and mega parties for all these people, and I never honored my own brother. So I did that. I had a party for him. And I took a trip with my brother to Ireland. And 6 months later, he died of AIDS. And I got to show up for him, be a loving, kind sister, without shaming him. And again, you know, it's because of Alcoholics Anonymous and Al-Anon that I was able to do that. And I had a great sponsor, Marty O'Mara, who's passed away, so I can say her name. She was 26 years sober, and she had 24 years in Al-Anon, and she sent me to my first Al-Anon meeting, and I didn't know why I was going, but I went, and I'm really grateful that I did. And I also learned how to have a higher power through her. Now I have the kind of higher power that I like to use this image of standing on a cliff and falling back into the wind, and the wind is my higher power. I don't really know what my higher power is. I just know it's there, and I have to just give into it and fall back into it. And it works for me. It has worked for me, and I get to sponsor people in this program. Marty told me I'd be a good sponsor someday, and I used to think she was nuts. But you see, the magic of Alcoholics Anonymous has worked on me in a lot of areas. I'm still a work in progress, but you know what? I really care about people today. I really show up for people today. A lady called me yesterday who her husband died, and she used to come to our meetings. And he died. He was a drunk. He never got it, you know. but I'm going to the funeral tomorrow. And that's what I've learned how to do in Alcoholics Anonymous. We show up for each other. And when my brother died and my father died, it was the people of Al-Anon and AA that showed up for the funeral with me and helped me go through that. I forgot to mention that when I was 4 months sober that I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. And that had a lot to do with the falling all the time. But you know what? I haven't fallen since I've been sober. So I think the alcohol had a lot to do with it too. And I have been in remission from MS for 7 years. And I think it's a direct result of learning how to live one day at a time and not getting into fear and just doing what's in front of me and being of service. So I've used up all my time, and I really appreciate the chance to share with y'all. Thanks for letting me share.